This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice.
Have you met Anthony Albanese yet?
No, I haven't. Yeah, didn't even see him wandering the halls or anything, but he's in Europe at the moment, I think. So when we were down there for Parliament School, was not going to see him.
Well, what do you do? Remember, his name is Anthony. He is currently out there meeting world leaders. Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister? He's Prime Minister, right?
Yeah, he's Prime Minister, yeah.
Do they have a president? No, Prime Minister.
They're in the same boat as we are.
Okay, great. He said, big press conference, always that awkward thing when they're meeting world leaders and there's lots of cameras going off and they're shaking hands. And Trudeau says,
it's a real pleasure to be meeting with a great progressive leader. We're really, really excited to have a friend in Australia. Australia's been a long-time friend. We'll be talking lots with Tony and all our friends in Australia.
And then he called him Tony. And I didn't realize this, but Anthony, I suppose in theory, Anthony could be Tony, right?
Yeah,
I guess.
I don't know. Was he pausing to decide if, Labor was really progressive, or did he forget the name? That's sort of what I was actually debating. But maybe that's a bit too mean for.
No, I think in Trudeau's world, Trudeau is the classic shiny, centrist, pragmatic liberal guy who everyone loves because he's quite handsome, and turns out his policies are dog shit and he's happening to build more oil pipelines and fuck over First Nations people. Surprise, surprise. But I'm sure he considers himself progressive.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But there you go, Tony. We've had two Tony prime ministers within the past sort of decade, and we're living in the age of Tony.
Yeah, that makes me wonder if being Anthony has been a political choice.
Oh,
considering the previous Tony we had was, and whether or not they just, I couldn't think of the right adjective to sum up that period in history. But I wonder if, being Anthony was, maybe I'll ask him that and see what he says.
That should be your first question, definitely, yeah. He could also differentiate himself from Tony Abbott by having better policies than him. But changing the name works as well.
Low bar, though, I feel.
Talk about the Greens, that bunch of idiots.
If you want the goal for life, free marijuana, vote Greens.
These people, these Greens, they are snake oil salesmen.
They're a bunch of breathbags and a bunch of idiots, and I've got no time for them whatsoever.
Frankly, I've always found the Greens to be a real serious danger to Australia.
Serious danger to Australia.
Oh, hello everyone. This is Serious Danger, a podcast about Greens politics in Australia. It's not an official Greens Party podcast. Stop asking, please. It is made possible with the help of the Green Institute and produced by Michael the Griffin. Thank you for joining us. Quick shout out to the new patrons who have jumped on board Serious Danger AU on Patreon. All your money helps us make this show happen. Kiralee, Jenny, Jesse, Lilac, Gregory, Nadia, Zoe, Declan, Truther Ford, and Joe. Welcome aboard the wonderful Patreon family. More bonus Patreon content is on its way, I promise. If you can afford $3 a month, whatever you can chip into this wonderful cause, go to patreon.com/seriousdangerau. Thank you. This week, the last week of Emerald Moon's absence, I'm joined by the new Greens member for Brisbane. Are you still member-elect, or have you've been elected now, right? It's all confirmed?
I think so the writs have been returned, the seat's been declared, but I haven't been sworn in yet. So I think technically still member-elect. There's been literally no sort of information on what my title is yet. So I'm just sort of going with the flow.
The King of Brisbane, the party spokesperson for youth and LGBTQIA plus issues, just spent the week at Parliament School. Stephen Bates, hello, welcome back to Serious Danger.
Hello, thank you for having me. Last time I was here, it was raining and we were talking about floods, and now I'm here again and it's raining some more. So it seems every time I agree to come on this show, the weather goes to shit. So I don't know how.
You've cursed us. I think, isn't Sydney about to cop a shitload of rain as well? That's on its way.
It's all good old La Nina still ruining all our lives. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for being a co-host. Really appreciate it. How has your life been since you won? You were on the show, obviously, before the election. You goddamn won after a while, after a lot of counting happened, but you eventually got there. There was talk of you finishing your shifts at an Apple store while still being elected. A lot of talk about that. How has your life been?
It's weird to think that's been a month. and there's so much that has happened. I haven't actually, my sort of moment of processing everything that happened actually occurred while I was down in Canberra, but it's because I haven't had time really to think about everything that's gone on. So, I mean, yeah, I was looking forward to sort of a week of kind of nothing the day after the election, and then the count decided to take an extra week. So I couldn't go anywhere. All I did was sit at home and try and distract myself and not look at the ABC website, which obviously did not work because all I wanted to do was stare at it and just press the refresh button a million times. Yeah, that was a roller coaster is the best way of describing that week, because like the Saturday was amazing. We were all on the high because, Libby had won. Max had won. We were ahead on the primary votes, and then so the postal started coming in, and the gap started closing, and then we fell behind, and then we flipped in front again, and then it was all a complete experience. And then so we ended up, it was the absentee votes that really pushed us over the line. So basically, for people who don't know what that is, if you haven't updated your enrollment but you've moved somewhere else and you're still having to vote for the Brisbane electorate, that is what an absentee vote is. So those broke really heavily towards us, and so did the late postal votes as well. So we ended up coming third on the primary count by 11 votes. So I'm the first person to win from third place on primary since Andrew Wilkie. So that was in 2010. So Anthony Green reckoned it happens like every 15 years or so. So there we go. Add that into the historic election, I suppose. But so then what happened? Yeah, then I had to still go back to work, which was very surreal. Yeah, I was only allowed on the floor talking to customers for about 3 hours, and then because we literally had people coming in asking for me, and people calling the store. Yeah, it was very. People doing like a classic, I know Stephen. He said he would give me discounts and da-da-da-da-da.
Hang on.
Yeah, people like really just, hamming it up. But we had that. We had people calling the store asking when I was working. And, people weren't going to say when I was. But, yeah, it was so weird. And then someone from the Daily Mail ended up coming in and taking photos because the front of the store is all glass, so you can sort of just take photos straight in. Taking photos of me with people like very like paparazzi-esque, which I was not honestly not a fan of. Like experiencing it now, it feels very like because you don't know what's happening, and it feels very sort of uncomfortable. But I also felt bad for the person that I was helping because his face is now splashed all over the internet as well. But
that's kind of cool. Well, it's on the Daily Mail, so But it is what it is.
Yeah, it was weird because they didn't know what to do with me because this had never happened before in the company. So actually, literally, so I got to work and they were like, but it ended up going all the way up to like the president of retail for Apple, and they didn't know. Because they had to basically make this decision, which was, employee privacy, customer privacy, all that sort of stuff. But also, this could be a lot of free media for us. But it's also going to be political, and unsure how we feel about being seen to support a party that's, really proud and
wants us to pay taxes.
Yeah. In taxes and unions and all this fun stuff. So they decided against it. So I basically was out the back for my last 2.5 shifts, just chilling, not talking to customers, which I feel like is such a...
they shoved you out the back.
They shoved me out the back. So such a poetic way. But, I was there for 5 years, so I got a really cute 5-year plaque as well. So that was really nice too. But that was a very, very surreal experience.
Oh, back to school to prove to Dad that I'm not a fool.
This week you've started your new job, really, and you went to Parliament School. You had this induction. What the fuck is that? How does that work, and how was it?
So I didn't really know what it was going to be either. But it's the best way to describe it is imagine like the first day of school is kind of like what it is. So we all got into the into the House of Reps entrance, which was very fancy in itself. But myself and Max, we were staying at a hotel right near Parliament House, and we walked in together. And we basically just lined up with a bunch of school kids at the front door entrance because we thought this is how you get in. This is just the front door. And the security guys are like, no. You need to go around the other side. But so we walked in there. It was all very very official. So you walk in and you get your badge, you get this medallion, you get your pass. The medallion's really, really pretty. It's basically just sort of a memento, and it just says, member for Brisbane on it in my case. And it just looks really pretty, and it's just supposed to be I guess like a sort of gift to symbolize how monumental this is and something for you to take home to remember. But but yeah, it used to give you
getting
free.
paid $211,000, but sure, yeah, you get a little gold medallion as well. That's fine.
Must have gold medallion. Well, it used to give you free access on public transport and free access to sports games, is what they told us.
What?
And I was like, oh my God, these people. It wasn't enough you were getting paid $250,000 a year. You also had to get free public transport and then demand that the peasants pay for everything is basically like the vibe. But so that was weird. Obviously it doesn't happen anymore, which is a good thing. But but it was basically like met all the teals, which was really, really cool, all the new independents, which was good. We also had, because it's all the new MPs.
Goss, like who's like an arsehole and who's like awesome and who's fucking.
I really like the independents. They all seem really, really cool. Like I guess they're coming from the same perspective that we are. They're like real people from the outside. And they're sort of coming in and they're in the same boat we are, and that it's all sort of new and we may not have expected to win, but this is the situation that we're in now. But I really like the member for North Sydney. She's really, really cool. Really fun. Honestly, they were all really nice. Zoe Daniels is really awesome. She has so many, obviously former foreign correspondent reporter. She has so many stories.
Right.
And most of my time sitting around the table with her at lunch was just like jaw on the floor, listening to everything she was telling us. But they're all pretty progressive as well. I was sort of unsure because there was all this teal stuff. So people like, they're basically just liberals that want action on climate change. Which having talked to a lot of them, I don't necessarily think that's true. I think they're a lot more progressive than people have given them credit for. Just some general conversations that I've had. Yeah, the best moment.
Let's wait until we get to tax legislation. Then
obviously, we'll see. How we go. Yeah. We'll see. But initial impressions and initial conversations were. I was like, okay.
You're fired. 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 You're fired.
Now, obviously, were you talking about another big story alongside the biggest story this week, which we'll get to in a sec, at least certainly in the Canberra bubble of the political world, is this idea we found out the Albanese government is cutting the number of staff that crossbenchers are going to receive while in Parliament. Crossbench members and senators, the advisors being reduced from 4 down to 1. This caused quite a to-do. A lot of the crossbench quite pissed off. A lot of Labor MPs sort of defending the decision, saying, hey, no, we've all got the same. And when I'm a backbencher, I only get one, blah, 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 blah. What are we to make of all this? What should we think of this hoo-ha?
I think, well, the way they're sort of framing it, isn't it, that it's basically sort of just a saving to the budget, which in the grand scheme of a federal budget that's over $350 billion, a million or two is sort of chump change. And I feel like when you're an independent and when you're on the crossbench, especially when you're an independent, there is so much legislation that is getting thrown at you and so many, motions and last second amendments that are getting thrown at you. And oftentimes you're only finding out about them 6:30 p.m. on a Friday or 6:30 p.m. on a Thursday, and you're expected to vote on them either that evening or the next morning. Having just one person to go through what could be like immense legislation just seems completely unrealistic. So my thoughts on it are, people deserve the staffing that is necessary to actually do the job. And when you're trying to get your head around what can be extremely complex issues and extremely, the minutiae of an amendment that could completely drastically overhaul the intention of a bill, you need that support. And people have elected these independents, and people have elected people in the crossbench to, be a third voice and be a different voice in Parliament. And I think it's better for democracy if we actually give people the resources that they need. So, people on the backbench might say, I'm on the backbench, I only get one, but you also get the entire party structure behind you to support you in that. Like, you might not necessarily need an advisor to tell you all the, different amendments on bills, because you have the entire Labor Party there.
And it's your legislation, right? The government is introducing the vast majority of legislation. Yeah. So it's not like you need to consider the issues on how you're going to vote. It's your fucking government that is bringing this bill into the Parliament. Yeah. The crossbench, if there's a serious debate going on and it comes down to actually a crossbench vote in the Parliament, do actually need to be across the details and don't have that same kind of infrastructure than the major parties do. And certainly the government doesn't have.
Yeah, and you're also in the Labor Party, so you're not allowed to conscience vote. So it doesn't matter. So it's which isn't like a read. It's just it's just a fact.
You need staffers to support your conscience on the crossbench, yes. So just to clarify though, so your electorate staff will be the same. So the people working in your office for the electorate of Brisbane, that's all the same. We're just talking about parliamentary staff and senior advisors. Is that correct?
Yeah, okay, that's correct. So you get 4 electorate office staff, and then you also get down in Canberra for staff to help you there as well. Right. So you could basically have your electorate office staff doing electorate support work, helping individuals, helping community orgs and things like that. And then your Canberra staff, it's up to people how they do it, obviously, but in theory, you would have your Canberra staff sort of on top of, parliamentary proceedings, process, bills, everything else that goes on in the bubble.
And so it's, advisors for these independents. And this affects the Greens as well, right? Like, you guys are losing, this applies to you as well?
So it's weird.
Does it work a bit differently because you're a party?
Yeah, it works a bit different because we're a party. So, but we're not getting any extra, is my understanding, despite the fact that, we've grown in numbers quite substantially. So we're basically operating same number of people, but way more MPs and senators. So it's an effective cut, I suppose, is how you would interpret it.
Okay.
Yeah, which is why we end up bringing a lot of the time our electorate staff down to Canberra, because you've got to,
It's very true you say that, because Emerald Moon did beam in her take on this from South Korea. She's a staffer herself. She works for Michael Berkman for the seat of Mayweather in the state seat in Queensland, and sort of talked about that messy line. Here's what Emerald had to say.
Hey comrades, well, I'm actually nearly back. I'm recording this on the last day of my holiday, so I will probably be back next week. But in the meantime, just sending in a quick message to say I miss you all. Oh, and hi, baby Stephen. I hope that your first day of Parley School, or your first week of Parley School was very fun. Extremely sorry to hear that you're on the show talking about how they're not going to give you any staff. I don't really know the full extent of how the staffing stuff impacts us. I almost don't want to know. I think I'm also just very jaded on this, being a staffer at a state level in Queensland Parliament, where it's just a constant fight to get adequate staffing. I think that, yes, this move by Labor is absolutely a response to the demise of the two-party system. It's absolutely a response to the growth of the crossbench. And in that sense, it's kind of a good sign, as depressing as it is. But it's also the entire parliamentary staffing system, probably deliberately, is so not designed to enable genuine crossbench participation. But it's also not designed to enable good representation. Even things like my position, I'm meant to sort of do parliamentary work. And even though I work in the electorate office, technically I'm not meant to do any work that helps constituents. So the idea that our work serving constituents should be completely divorced from the work that we do in Parliament, kind of telling, right? So it's just one of those things. It fucking sucks, but having to publicly whinge about not having enough staff that's an interesting one. I don't know how we do that and like endear ourselves to the public in that way, because no one fucking likes staffers. But yeah, I'm sure we'll probably talk about this more. Again, keen to hear both of yours takes.
Yeah, so that's Everald's take there, and obviously it's always messy and resources are always stretched. Sean Kelly made a good point on Insiders, I thought, where he sort of said, well, I was a staffer and we only had so many people, but then I thought about it and we were massively overworked. And obviously there's a huge, I think in the Jenkins report, there was talk about just how overworked people are in Parliament House and simply the resources aren't being allocated there. So why do you think that the Albanese government would do it? A lot of the media take on this was like, this seems like a bizarre misstep. This seems to get the crossbench and independents offside right off the bat. It's in their political interests for the independents to do well so that they keep their seats and the Liberals don't win them back. What do you think is going on here? Why would the Albanese government do this? Do they sincerely believe that they're actually saving costs?
If you want my take on it.
Yes.
It's interesting that people say it's it's in their political interest to keep the independents on side, because I don't think it is. So my sort of analysis of the issue is that if you only have once you elect the speaker, which I'm assuming is going to come from Labor, if you only have 76 seats in the House of Reps and you have the bang on majority by 76, and you've just come out of an election where the Greens have won seats in the lower house, there's a huge increase in the number of independents. The crossbench has gone from 6 to 16. It is in your political, and there's this, huge tide against the major parties. Like the Liberal and Labor vote both went backwards this election. It's in your interest to make sure that people don't think a sort of, minority government or hung parliament could actually work, because you don't want it to, because you want to maintain your institutional power and your political power. So my sort of analysis of it is that it makes sense that they would try and do this, because you don't want the public to think that electing third parties or independents could actually be productive and could actually do something. So
these bastards.
So it makes sense to me. It's like, yeah, you would just, hamstring them. Hamstring, whatever. You would, try and minimize the. Yeah, you would try and minimize the impact that they can have in their local communities and in Parliament,
right?
Because then you can campaign in 3 years and say, "Hey, look, they were useless. You have to vote for a major party, otherwise nothing will ever happen." That's my take on it, anyway. So I'm very much of the. I still think it's a misstep and that it's stupid, because all that it's going to do is. They went into after the election saying, we want this to be collaborative. We want, democracy to thrive. And all it's doing is just seemingly backtracking on that message. So I think I get why they've done it, but I still think it's a bad move. I think they've shot themselves in the foot.
Also, to me, it's just crazy that this is a political decision, right? The staffing of elected representatives should not be a political toy. And obviously under the Morrison government, they increase the number of staffers. Like, this is being used for political influence in a horse trading kind of way as the parliament is run. It's just nuts. Like, I know you're elected the government, but you shouldn't be able to determine, what constitutes decent working conditions for everybody in that place. And no matter what the makeup of the parliament, the workload for an independent MP is going to be pretty similar every single time. So there should be a set number of staff that reflects the amount of work that we reasonably expect them to do. And it shouldn't be up to the government of the day to be able to fuck around with that and make political decisions with the allocation of resources for our MPs to be able to do their jobs, no?
That sounds like a good policy, Tom, and that's why it's disgusting. And it will never happen.
Here's the news. Today, a bunch of crusties stinking of petunia oil are upset because the planet is dying. But worse than that, the protest has mildly disrupted shoppers trying to get to H&M to buy an item of fast fashion clothing that will end up in landfill in about a week.
All right, big stories this week. Obviously, huge fallout from the Supreme Court decision officially being made that women and people who can get pregnant in the US have had their rights stripped away. That is fucked up and depressing, clearly. Maybe this weekend you've been along to a protest in solidarity and also drawing attention to reproductive rights here in Australia. We'll put a link in the show notes. We did an episode back in March when that decision was leaked, when Emerald and I sort of talked about the situation for abortion rights in Australia. Obviously better than the US, but still not safe and legal and free as it should be. That's what the Greens fight for. Check out that episode if you want to have a listen back to that. But, solidarity to anyone trying to do anything about not returning our societies to the Middle Ages. But the other big thing I want to talk about this week was, of course, the city of Sydney was brought to a standstill thanks to protests from Blockade Australia and their week of action designed to, quote, show our collective resistance against Australia's ecological destruction and call attention to this country's climate inaction. People might remember, old school heads might remember episode 2. We talked to Max from Blockade Australia. They'd been disrupting coal ports and coal trains. One activist was sentenced to 12 months in prison last year for stopping a coal train just for 5 hours. There was talk at the time, you might remember, of like 25-year sentences for some of these activists because they interrupted a train, and that's the worst thing that anyone can possibly do. On Monday morning during peak hour, 22-year-old activist Marley Cooper from Lismore allegedly bike-locked herself to her car steering wheel after blocking the entrance to the Sydney Harbour Bridge tunnel. Traffic was brought to a stop for about 45 minutes or an hour, which again is the worst thing that anyone can ever do. She and 9 other protesters were taken into police custody, arrested under new laws that prohibit disruption on Sydney roads. She was there for about 30 hours. She was released after agreeing to return to Lismore and abide by a curfew. Then the cops followed her back to Lismore, arrested her again because she wasn't going to get to Lismore by 8 p.m. Fucking bonkers.
I can't believe the cops followed her back. That's just...
Isn't that insane?
Yeah.
All up, the New South Wales Police made a total of 22 arrests over the week, plus the 7 arising from the raid of the protesters' camp last week, which we'll talk about in a sec. They're looking at 2 years jail. They could face up to $22,000 in fines. And, of course, across the media, very angry commuters, psychotic right-wing backlash, a debate about protest tactics, and I agree with the message and not the method, blah, 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 blah. Stephen Bates, what did you make of the Blockade Australia week of action in Sydney this week?
It's such an interesting... I can't watch things like that on the news because of my own mental health reasons. Like watching some of the things that people say,
yes,
like the usual, like you said, when you say like the usual right-wing backlash, it's always like, I find the backlash that people feel is just so violent and murderous. And it's in response to something that is essentially inherently peaceful. Like, yes, you're blocking traffic and I know it's convenient and I know it sucks. But at the end of the day, governments are not usually your friend and they're not usually on your side. Like that is how you make change in like all of history. Like you don't have to look back that far. Like speaking of Roe v. Wade, during that came about during the 70s under Nixon, who was hardly a progressive president, and the Supreme Court back then was conservative as well, but they found in favor of a person's right to choose because of movements in the street, because of mass protest, because they were afraid to make any other decision. And that is basically what people are just trying to do now. Like, we have had governments for decades and decades that have done absolutely nothing on climate change. They've ignored IPCC reports, they've ignored the science, they've ignored everything because, the almighty dollar and the fear that you might upset a coal baron. And so people don't have any other option. When people say, I agree with the message but not the method, what is the right method? Is my question. People have people have voted, people have done their marches, people have signed petitions. If I could get an ETA on when the correct method is going to work, that'd be fantastic. But nothing has happened. Nothing is happening, and we keep getting told, the tipping point's 2030. The tipping point's coming. We need to actually do something about it, and governments just walk around saying, someone should really do something. It's just so sad that we can't legislate these targets, even though we have majorities in parliament. It's just so sad. And so, I understand why people do this, because people have to do that. In a healthy democracy, there should be protests. There should be, these sort of actions. And it's a sign of a healthy democracy if they do happen. And I think, the laws that are being brought in by, it's not just New South Wales, it's other state governments as well, basically criminalizing protest and criminalizing dissent is just horrific and anti-free speech, to use a phrase from the right wing. And it's very, very literal case because it is a protest against the state, against the government, that the government is arresting you for doing.
Right.
So it's all kinds of messed up. And it's a bit scary as well. Like the fact that, the major parties and all the political, well, not all the political players, but a lot of the political players just see this is the way to go. This is how you deal with protests. You don't actually address the issues or the grievances that people have.
Crisis. We've got to sort out these hippies and their protests. That's the real issue facing Australia today. Not the fact that the earth is on fucking fire and the oceans are boiling and the Great Barrier Reef is about to explode. No, we need to crack down on these uni students.
yeah, that's actually not an issue. What the real issue is that someone locked themselves to a bike chain. So they need to go to prison. They need to get fined. And then everything else can just continue business as normal, and this will stop happening.
Yes.
That seems to be the logic, and it's just,
indeed. We'll get into more details of it, exactly. And some of the nuance, some little critiques that I'd be interested to run by you and see what you think that I thought watching this all play out. Emerald Moon had to take on this one as well, beamed in from South Korea. Over to you, Emerald.
Speaking of public perceptions, I feel like it's good that I actually haven't seen many people this week on the left or in the Greens even arguing that it's a bad look to stand behind the Blockade Australia protests because, they're too disruptive or blah, 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 and it'll just turn people against us. And I tweeted this sort of in relation to that, but it also relates to like the flag stuff last week. This idea that, we shouldn't be too annoying or we shouldn't stand up for things because like the left or the right will attack us. And it's like, obviously they're going to fucking attack us anyway. Like, don't fall into that ALP trap. And if we're not standing up for something, what's the fucking point? And you don't win by taking strategic advice from your enemies. That's fucking dumb. Solidarity with all the Blockade Australia folks, in particular, obviously, the young woman Marley from Lismore. I literally got the confirmation last week. Someone said that it's confirmed my high school is condemned and going to be fucking knocked down in Lismore. So my heart I feel that little twist in my stomach when I see young people from Lismore fighting for this, and they're incredibly brave, and we need more people like that. And it's great that the Greens will stand in solidarity with them in the face of fucking cooked police pressure.
Interesting point there from Emerald talking about, Greens solidarity. Adam Band is on holidays this week, I think, so he hasn't been particularly active or vocal about this issue. But lots of other MPs that I've seen, David Shoebridge, our New South Wales Greens senator, was, talking about how insane these anti-protest laws were and standing in solidarity with people going on strike and taking direct non-violent action. Is that, do you think, across the party, that's what first of all, that's what people expect of the Greens. There's a long and very proud tradition of direct action and getting arrested for the sake of environmental action across the party. And also the fact that, sitting MPs and senators will join picket lines, they will go on protests, and they will stand in solidarity with activists like this who take that action, even if it pisses off a substantial portion of the public in a way, or at least all the familiar voices will get outraged and say all the normal shit about this. We really need to stare that stuff down, right?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And I don't think we should be afraid to stare it down. Like, especially if if you're an MP, but that is me now. If you're an MP or senator, you should be showing solidarity with that. Right. But you should also be fighting to change it in the Senate or in the House of Reps, which I think is what differentiates us from other parties, is that we'll go out there, we'll be at the protests, we'll be screaming with everyone. We're also forming policy in the background to actually try and address this. And I think that's what gives us the credibility to sit at the protests, march in the protests, do whatever it may be. Is because, we're trying to attack it from all angles. We understand, or at least I shouldn't say we, but speaking for myself, I understand that, legislative change is important, but a lot of that only comes from, grassroots movement, people protesting, marching, making their voices heard. So I think, it's important that we do both. That's where I think the Greens do really, really well. Like, nothing pisses me off more than seeing people at rallies who will say, oh, this is such an important issue. And, it's just so, it's just so important that we do something about this. And then we'll literally legislate to do the complete opposite.
Right.
So I think that shits me off. But doing, 100%. Like, I've already been to like 3 or 4 different rallies as the MP elect, and people do criticize. They say things like, "Oh, you're in there now. You should be doing something about it."
Sure.
I'm like, yes, it's possible to do 2 things at once. Like, it's possible to, march and protest and be there physically or in solidarity with people, and also advocate for change from the legislative side as well.
Yeah.
Am I making sense? It makes sense in my head what I'm saying.
No, that makes total sense. And I think that is again, another really admirable part of the Greens party and movement broadly, and the deliberate strategy of people to, get elected to Parliament, become, in a way, part of the machinations of the state, but to use that platform, to use the resources that come with those positions, and to use your political power that you actually have, as the Greens certainly do in the Senate on the crossbench in this new Parliament, to enact legislative change. I mean, of course, I'm sure the people of Blockade Australia want legislative action, want action from the state, want them to actually do something way more than they've committed to actually address the climate crisis. And the only way you do that is through a parliamentary mechanism, what with things being as they are. But yes, the idea that, I don't know, there's a huge debate in the UK at the moment that Labor MPs, frontbench Labor MPs, are not allowed to join striking workers on the picket line, right? Because the argument is that a sensible party of government doesn't get involved, doesn't choose sides between workers and capital, even though they're the fucking Labor Party. Like, it's just mind-blowing, the idea is that just because you're elected or you're on the front bench of a political party that, it's silly and undergraduate for you to go out there and stand alongside ordinary people withdrawing their labour to improve their lot. It's fucking mind-numbing.
Broken country. Like, broken party. Broken Britain. Like, oh my God. That is, wow.
Yeah.
That's genuinely, the mental gymnastics for that is actually genuinely kind of impressive.
Yeah.
Like, we're the party of the workers. But no, please don't actually engage with them in any capacity.
Not those ones.
Not those ones.
Now, let's just zero in on this. So, obviously, again, crazy right-wing people say, lock these people up, cut off their benefits, throw them in jail, they suck, how dare they? There are examples of some people who might be sympathetic to the cause of climate action, who, again, support the message, not the method. And just one example of that I thought was worth talking through. Michael Pascoe, journalist at the New Daily, tweets how not to win friends and influence people, and tweets an article linking to the story about Blockade Australia. Someone else replied to that saying, what's more inconvenient than traffic jams is climate change, drawing this link between this 45 minutes of inconvenience that people experienced on the Harbour Tunnel is nothing compared to the massive inconvenience of fires and floods, etc. And Michael Pascoe replies, and pissing off thousands of already put upon commuters, forcing them to burn a little more carbon is so preventing climate breakdown, an unimaginative, mistargeted protest. What would you say to someone who's in good faith, broadly supportive of the general movement and serious climate action, is annoyed at the status quo, who says, well, I don't know, why do you have to inconvenience morning commuters? Why are they the target of this kind of disruptive protest as opposed to, pushing your efforts somewhere else? What would you say to that?
There's no sort of right way of doing it, would be my response to that. If people stop a coal train, like we talked about a bit earlier, for 5 hours, you get thrown in prison.
Yes.
If people march, that's inconvenient. You might get thrown in prison. If you attach yourself to something, you'll get thrown in prison. If you, all these different methods, you get legally punished for doing it.
Right.
So I don't think there's any sort of, there's no right way to protest. I mean, at the end of the day, the protest is supposed to be inconvenient, and the job of it is to, while it may inconvenience people in the short term, it brings it to national attention. Like, we would not be having this conversation about Blockade Australia if they were just, sitting in a park, doing nothing, having a picnic, because the nature of protest is that it is inconvenient. And, the fact that they've done this and it has become a national story and it's brought attention to A, climate change, but B, the protest laws is part of the action. And I think as well, this is sort of just my analysis of it, but if you look at other sort of movements that have happened across the world, I think of like the US civil rights movement, where you had people like Malcolm X who were advocating for, direct action, sometimes violence. And then you had people like Martin Luther King, who were sort of in the same, wanted the same outcome, but different ways of getting there. When you have this movement of people who are, protesting and inconveniencing people and, having that direct action, it is inconvenient for people, but it also then forces people to look for, what am I trying to say? Not the sensible center, because that's not the phrase I want, but it forces people to accept that.
You've been hanging out with those teals too much, Stephen. Don't you dare say sensible center.
No, because that's not what I mean. But it forces people to address it, acknowledge that there's an issue, and look for different solutions. And so while you had in the US, you had the white liberals who were so offended by what Malcolm X was doing, they looked to Martin Luther King as the sort of alternative for that. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's all part of getting the outcomes that we all want and that we all need. So, while you may think it's not the right way of doing it, or you may think that, it's inconveniencing people and that car sitting there pumping out that tiny extra bit of carbon is actually going to be more responsible for climate change. The 100 companies that cause 71% of emissions. It's all part of the process. And I know it's inconvenient and I know people think that it sucks, but if it doesn't happen, nothing is going to change at the end of the day. Like if we all just sort of sit around talking about our feelings and not actually getting out there and, shouting and screaming and making things difficult, nothing will ever happen because nothing has ever changed because people were silent.
Yes, or asked nicely, right?
Or asked nicely, yeah.
I think there's a few things to say here too. I mean, this issue particularly is so totalizing, so universal, and affects every single person stuck in that traffic jam, every single person protesting, obviously. Again, underlining the fact, Mally Cooper from Lismore saw her town devastated by floods, which we know were exacerbated by the climate crisis. Okay, so these are people who've literally survived the natural disasters that are coming down the pipeline if we don't change course very quickly. So the drawing the connection between every single one of us and the fact that we live in a society, and in the same way that Mally Cooper's actions affect people in that traffic jam, all of our actions affect everybody else and affect the planet. I feel like that's a powerful part of the protest.
Yeah.
I think the seriousness with which these people are taking this radical problem is also underlined through these protests. In a weird way, the anti-protest laws underline how seriously these people take it. These people are prepared to go to jail. They're prepared to, be financially bankrupt if they're not supported by other people and pay $22,000 in fines. The more harsher draconian penalties that are brought in, they're still doing these actions because that's how hard they believe in this scientific reality that we are simply not doing enough about. And that's how seriously they take this extraordinarily serious situation. So I think that can really speak to, I think communicating a level of commitment and principles to everybody else is very valuable. And I think Blockade Australia themselves had a pretty good response. They tweeted out saying, movement allies say blocking traffic is a bad tactic. What are your tactics? What actions can possibly speak to the urgency of preventing climate collapse? And go, right? So it's sort of saying, okay, we've got all these critiques. What would you have us do instead? Or people are saying, if you want to do another protest that's targeted in a different way, go do that. Blockade Australia's mission is to get as many people mobilised and activated around the climate crisis as humanly possible. So just fucking go do it. And if you do that as a response to Blockade Australia's actual protest, then that also shows how successful they've been as well.
Yeah. And this is the thing, another point that I want to sort of make is that it's also climate change will not impact everyone the same way. It's going to disproportionately, and it already is, it will disproportionately impact working and middle class people, the people that are commuting. If you're commuting to work, you're going to be impacted by the effects of climate change, be it through higher insurance prices, your house falling in, whatever it may be, you're going to feel the impacts of that far more than someone who, helicopters to some island.
The Gina Reinhardt or Clive Palmer, the very people who are worsening the crisis.
Exactly, who are causing it and making it so much worse. It's also about having that, solidarity with like your own class of people, because it's not going to impact the Gina Reinhardts and the Cole Barons the same way it's going to impact someone that commutes to work every single morning. It's just not, because they're going to be able to afford to deal with the, inevitable outcomes of it. The people that do commute to work and working middle class people are going to be disproportionately worse off if we don't do something about it. And I think that's something that people don't talk about enough.
When Mally Cooper was locked herself to that steering wheel, and there was that footage. People might have seen it. This guy coming up and yelling at it, like calling her a cunt, saying that you're a selfish piece of shit. You're ruining everyone's day. And she sort of says, "I'm doing it for this. I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for you. This guy. I know it's inconvenient, but I'm doing. I am. You're not my enemy, I suppose," was the general message she was saying, which is pretty extraordinary for a 22-year-old to be able to do that, sitting in a car while everyone on that bridge hates you and a full-grown adult man is yelling abuse at you through a window, could very easily have turned violent very quickly. I thought that was pretty fucking incredible.
Yeah, inspirational and powerful, and more power to her.
Now, there was critique of Extinction Rebellion prior to the pandemic. People remember, again, in London, there were XR activists climbing on top of the tube during peak hour, I believe. And people might have seen this footage again of people chucking stuff at those activists, pulling them off the train, getting extremely angry at what they were doing and were not at all impressed. And I think, even the left, people who are broadly supportive of XR and their goals and some of their tactics, was sort of saying this didn't feel like a great targeted attack because you're looking at, interrupting working people for a long period of time too, for sort of quite an extended period. And you're sort of shutting down the entire tube network in London, which does have, massive implications. And then there was an XR protest that targeted like private jets. They were blocking entrance to a private jet airspace. And I think that was much more recognized as like a pretty amazing and brilliantly targeted protest, because that is targeting the 1%. These private jets are a massive contributor to the climate crisis, and people were on board with that. And I only mentioned those two examples as an example of like, protests is messy and it's not always going to be 100% perfect. And I'm sure that Blockade Australia will, look over this week of action and will evaluate it and think about what did and didn't work. And I think I have a lot of admiration for Blockade Australia for trying different things, and not everything is going to work, brilliantly according to plan or go exactly the way they wanted to. But I suppose people on the left who are, sympathetic to what we're going for here, who want more serious climate action and who broadly endorse the idea of direct action and protest, it's important to allow that space, I suppose, for these kind of direct actions to take lots of different forms, and don't fall into the right-wing conservative mindset trap, which is, this entire strategy is bankrupt and you can't interrupt or inconvenience people in any way whatsoever. That's bad politics.
I think it's also, that example you gave in London is a really, really good one as well, because we've got to remember as well through this whole process, and I think that's something that we as the Greens did really, really well during the election campaign, is that climate crisis isn't the fault of 99% of the population.
Yep.
Like, people are just trying to get by. People need jobs to survive. That's how the economy is structured.
Yes.
The emissions that they're giving out, like Adam Bant would always say, someone working in a coal mine isn't responsible for the climate crisis. So I really like that idea of, having that class analysis within your climate change framework, which is something that I'm really passionate about. Shockingly as a left-wing person. But having, that class solidarity and worker solidarity, I think is really, really important in this whole process as well, because, like I said, it's not going to affect everyone the same. And we have to make sure we're, inconveniencing, your commuters, but also your private jet owners, making statements like that, I think are really, really powerful and really, really important, because you're taking it to the people that are actually doing it, blockading the entrance to some private runway or something like that is, I think, a really, really powerful symbolic message too. So I actually hadn't heard of that example. So that's really, really cool that they did that. I respect that.
It was good. But then look, it was a great protest that, as you say, you haven't heard about. That was, not reported in the mainstream media. It was not front page news in the same way that the Tube protest was, or certainly the way this kind of thing is. So, again, you've got to give it up. And again, Blockade Australia did those coal port protests. They were targeting, ports and coal trains that are a million miles away from anybody else, that are just targeted at massive companies that are exporting fossil fuels that are burnt in other countries that then cook the planet in a massive way that needs to stop immediately. They've done all that. And as you say, still face these draconian anti-protest laws and the consequences of jail time and massive, massive fines. So you're fucked anyway you protest.
No right
if
way
you
of
inconvenience
doing it.
anyone or do direct action anywhere, particularly on this issue, people are going to get mad at you, and the state are going to going to try and crack down at you. And I think the only response from the Greens, from the broader left generally, is to like stand in solidarity and back them in 100%, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Because otherwise, if we start like what we already have, like, criminalizing protests and everything like that, like that's a very slippery slope into a society that I do not want to be living in. A place where people, are afraid to protest and are afraid to stand up against the government is not actually ideal, despite what, right-wing commentators may say, that we should be throwing these people in prison and cutting off their benefits. Yes. That is not what a free society looks like.
It has been so revealing to see what people think protest is, or what it should be, or how it should work. Steve Price on the project. Again, you should love Blockade Australia because they piss off the worst people in the world. Steve Price on the project having an absolute sook, saying all this is pathetic.
You can have a protest like a march down a street that the police endorse and let you do. They do not tell people where they're going, and it's disgraceful.
At one point, like, they did a story on the blockade protest, and he turns to the rest of the panel and goes,
I mean, none of us would do that.
You fucking reckon, mate? You fucking reckon, Stephen? Wow, I can't believe that Steve Price would never lock himself to a steering wheel and block Sydney traffic for the sake of climate change. That's a real shocker to me. And he said, you can have a protest like a march down the street that the police endorse and let you do. That's fine. But these are illegal protests that go against the police's wonderful, wonderful laws. And I think, you fucking moron.
Tell me you don't know what a protest is without telling me.
Yes, you've got to tell the people in charge that you're organising.
I'm really unhappy. Is it okay? Is it okay if I march? Like, you can say no, but like, is it okay?
Great tweet from Andrew from our comrades at Punta Vista. Great podcast. Check it out. He tweeted, surely one of the most successful results of the neoliberal project in the West has been convincing most people that protesting is acceptable as long as no one is inconvenienced, nothing gets disrupted, deference is shown to police at all times, and no one is put out in any way. And I think that's so spot on. Like, when you have a neoliberal society, when we are just reduced to individuals and there's no such thing as society, the idea that you as an individual could stop or disrupt the plans of another individual for the sake of some kind of broader cause or bigger picture or higher principle, that is anathema. That is selfish, right? That is the ultimate privilege, as Kate Langbrook said to Mally Cooper on the project. Said,
do you understand that people find you to be extremely divisive because you talk about privilege, but the ultimate privilege was probably you deciding when people could get to work or not?
Completely ignoring the entire, as you say, class analysis and the way power works in this society and what she was doing it for. It is the most selfless act in the world to risk jail time and tens of thousands of dollars in fines for the sake of not their own self-advancement, not for clicks and likes, but to try and do something about the fact that the earth is on fucking fire.
Yeah. For people that you don't know and that you'll never meet.
Never meet.
Like, sacrificing potentially your individual liberty to be able to do that. Not really how I would define privilege, but, whatever the project, they have some, they're known for their hot take. But,
I love a hot take.
But yeah, it's just like, and that sums it up so perfectly. That tweet that you just quoted is exactly right. We've created this economy and this society where everything is so hyper individualistic and that everyone for themselves and that anything you possibly do to affect the broader collective shouldn't be done because we don't live in a society, like you said. And it's just such that it's just so spot on. And exactly what I've been trying to convey without managing to convey it. So I've been shown up by a tweet. But it's exactly right. We created this society and as well where people, have to work super long hours to make money. The workforce is so casualized that, if people were in that commute and they showed up once late for work and they're a casual worker, they can be fired. And that's another issue that we have to address as well. So, we've created this society and this economy where it's so precarious and people are on edge constantly because they don't necessarily know where the next pay is going to come from or if they're going to be able to afford their rent or, with inflation going up and the price of petrol going up and all these things collectively coming together to stress people out because that's how we've decided to structure our society. It doesn't surprise me when people have this backlash to protest because that's exactly how the system has been set up. So that you don't have solidarity with people, that you don't feel empathy with them, that you effectively are encouraged to just endorse the status quo because you're too scared to do anything else.
Yes, and we can't. we can't change anything, right? So again, in the UK with these strikes, so if you do anything about it, if you're facing a climate crisis and you actually stand up to the powers that be and try and do something about it by withdrawing your labour, again, the right-wing press will paint you as a selfish person. You should just shut up, accept your lot, and go back to work so that other people can get around, ignoring the fact that it's those people's labour that allows society to function, and that's exactly what a strike demonstrates. You withdraw that labour and everything goes to shit and people start freaking out. And you demonstrate the value of their labour, and so you're fighting for a better deal. No, you got to shut up. Yeah, climate change is really, really important. This is what we heard from the New South Wales Liberal government. It's a really important issue, but don't do anything about it, right? You're only allowed to try and advocate for this issue and bring about change in the prescribed, preset processes and institutions that we've set up for you to do that, right? You're not allowed to go outside those rules.
Yeah, in a way that's convenient for the state to ignore. Is effectively what they
do
mean.
A protest that doesn't change anything. Yes,
that is the dream. Please don't make a difference ever. But and that's the thing. And that's why protests are so essential, because they also, unlike the strikes that are happening in London at the moment, are so essential because it forces society to confront the idea that we're more powerful as a collective.
Yes.
And that the idea that, look, maybe one individual can change the world, but not without an entire village behind them and without an entire group of people behind them as well. And this is why I think governments hate giving in to, striking workers or protesters, because it completely undermines neoliberalism that people are inherently evil and they won't work together and they can't work together because that will never work, blah, 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 blah. But that's why we have to keep doing it. And that's why we have to keep being out there together, standing in solidarity with people, working together as collective movements and organizations, because that is how we affect change at the end of the day. And that is how you get outcomes. Acting as an individual might work in some scenarios. None immediately come to mind. But without, that collective movement and mass of people behind you that are on board and support and will also participate, we're just going to be stuck with the status quo. At the end of the day, and nothing will change.
The priorities of the state when it comes to the reality of climate action, and certainly their respect for protest, was laid very bare. And a lot of people pointed this out. On Monday, 31-year-old man from Bondi drove his vehicle into the protesters on Monday. Sky News reported this is him losing patience. He was fined $465 and received 3 demerit points.
Great.
Again, Blockade Australia protests facing 2 years in jail and $22,000 in fines, and lots of right-wing media voices saying that they should absolutely be subjected to the full extent of the law. Should go to prison for 2 years and deal with the consequences that comes with that. So that's where we're at. If you almost potentially kill people by driving your car into a protest, less than $500 at a couple of demerit points. Little slap on the wrist there. If you try and do something about the climate crisis for the sake of your fellow human beings, you could go to prison for 2 years.
Yeah, losing your patience is a really interesting way of pronouncing attempted murder. I haven't heard that one before. So,
I hate Mondays. I hate Mondays.
I'm going to run some people down. This is the thing. It's like, that just really, exactly right. Sums up the priorities and sums up what so many on the right and media think. It's just like, what a hero. What a hero for driving through that group of people who, are actually protesting to, save the planet, make sure I can have water and food in 10 years. But, ignore all that. It's just because they don't care at the end of the day. And I don't know why we expect them to care, because they don't. And they're not going to, because their entire ideology, like we were talking about before, is all that individualism. That they have to be able to quash the idea that a collective group of people could ever be able to do something, because they've made their entire business fortune of News Corp off of selling individualism to the entire West. So it can't be undermined. It can't be undone. So, I'm never surprised with the stuff that comes out of their mouth. It's always interesting that it's usually followed very quickly by a story on how free speech is being completely destroyed by the left, and that right-wing voices are being silenced. But it doesn't even surprise me anymore, the shit that they come up with to justify authoritarianism.
New South Wales Police Force established Strike Force Guard in March this year to prevent, investigate and disrupt unauthorised protests across the state. So this is set up directly in response to Blockade Australia. the anti-protest laws that were introduced by the coalition government, they originally included protests outside Parliament House and industrial action. Okay, so there was like going to be a further criminalisation almost of strikes in the state. Mm-hmm. When it looked like those laws would be defeated, then the coalition government backed down and just focused on environmental protests and stuff. Mm. Some Labor MPs had concerns. New South Wales Labor leader Chris Minns enthusiastically supported the bills, so shout out to Labor, of course. They voted for the legislation, which meant it passed despite strong opposition from the New South Wales Greens, the Animal Justice Party, and some independents. And there was this extraordinary raid on the bush camp of Blockade Australia protests last week that people might have heard about. It's bizarre. I just want to read a little bit of this right off the bat because it is just insane. A sharp-eyed hippie spotted them first. 2 men dressed in camouflage from their boots to their gloves, flat on their stomachs in the Colo Valley scrub. The men had been peering down on a camp in Sydney's northwest where about 40 activists from the Blockade Australia movement were gathered on Sunday. According to the activists and their lawyer, the men refused to answer questions about who they were. They lay perfectly still for a time, as if playing dead, before getting up quickly and marching through the camp. While doing so, one said, presumably into a covert radio, "We've been compromised."
Hello, youths.
hello, fellow kids. The pair were police, and after walking through the camp, they got into the back of an unmarked car whose driver promptly tore down a driveway to a dead end. When the car, just like Keystone Cop shit here.
Yeah.
When the car was forced to return the way it came, it was again confronted by activists. Their lawyer, Mark Davis, said at this point the activists still didn't know who these people were. They had guns on them, by the way. So they surrounded the car, blocking them in, letting down the tyres in a bid to keep the trespassers from fleeing. They didn't know if they were far-right vigilantes or if they were from the Daily Telegraph, Davis would later say in court, which is one and the same, question mark?
Yeah.
Anyway, in response to that, the cops then come back. About 100 cops come back in to search this entire camp. They trash a whole bunch of it. I think they beheaded a unicorn and stuck the toy unicorn's head on a spike.
Super normal stuff. Yeah.
Very normal behavior. One guy, Nicholas Weaver, was arrested there. He was charged with 5 offences, including assault. They introduced these bail conditions. Hours later, police told him that he hadn't met his bail conditions because the 78-year-old woman who had offered her home for him to stay in shared his values, quote unquote, and was therefore inappropriate for him to stay with her. It's chilling, right? These punishments, these draconian laws that are being brought in New South Wales. There are laws that are going to pass in Tasmania as well. The stuff before Victoria, the Victorian Parliament too, across the board. These have been condemned by Human Rights Watch. But this, as we say, this is the response of the police state to crack down on ordinary people with almost no institutional or political power other than taking these kind of non-violent direct action protests. This is where the political class think the threat is, as opposed to climate change itself.
What was the last bit of the story? The person who they didn't agree, or they wouldn't let him have bail because of she shared the same values, was it? Or
he was on bail. He's like, I'm going to go stay with this 78-year-old woman who's sympathetic, obviously, to Blockade Australia, but that would be breaching his bail terms because she shared his values that the planet shouldn't explode.
That's proper dystopian. Police like determining, sorry, you cannot stay with that lady because her ideology disagrees with the orthodoxy of the state.
That's wrong thing. That's actual wrong thing. That's thought crimes.
I'm like, what? Like, excuse me? Like, it's, oh my God.
And it's the suspicion. Like, if the police suspect that you're planning a protest in the future, then they can detain you or like bring action against you as well. I think there were people around the city, like the Sydney CBD, who were taken into police custody because police saw them and thought they looked like people who might be involved with this protest.
Yeah, you have a tattoo, go to jail kind of vibes. Like, it is just like proper sci-fi dystopian broken country is the only way that I can think to describe it.
Just to finish up, I think, and this sort of feeds back to a point that you were making right at the start of our conversation about this, which is, what else do you want to have happen? Like, what are the other avenues that we're supposed to be doing if we're not doing these kind of direct action, disruptive protests? As you say, is it through the ballot box? Because we just had a quote-unquote climate election and the government that was elected, their targets put us on track to 2 degrees of warming. They continue to accept hundreds of thousands of dollars in political donations from the fossil fuel industry, and they're backing in new fossil fuel projects and carbon bombs like the Scarborough project in WA or fracking the Beetaloo Basin. So ballot box not working out too great.
Yeah, that's not happening. And I think this election, sorry to interrupt, but I think the outcome of the next term is going to be very, very interesting because if people do think we should be looking at other avenues and, just vote, that'll fix everything. And things don't happen in the next 3 years under a quote unquote progressive government.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where people have to fall back on after that.
Right. Well, they could turn to the justice system, Stephen, like the court system that recently ruled that the environment minister doesn't have an obligation to future generations to factor in emissions reductions targets into their decision making, or a duty of care to young people to protect them from climate change. Or in the US, again, the Supreme Court handed down just a very fucked up decision which says that the Environmental Protection Agency doesn't have the authority to regulate the emissions from existing power plants. So that's what our delightful justice system is serving up. And then another option might be, actually striking. So, while I have a lot of respect for the school strike climate movement and indeed Blockade Australia, the dream would be able to see workers and unions being able to go on actual climate strikes, like actually withdrawing their labour and throwing a cog into the capitalist system to raise awareness about the climate crisis. I'd love to see that. Guess what? That's illegal too. Okay? Yeah. Under the Fair Work Act, you can't go on strike for political reasons or in solidarity with other people who are going on strike. You will face massive fines in the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars that will bankrupt you as a union. So sorry, that's illegal.
Yeah, like this is the thing. It's like if someone says to you, well, I agree with the message, but I don't agree with the way it's done. I think the easiest thing to do and the best thing you can do is just ask someone, okay, what other avenues do you think they should be using? Because then that forces the conversation that we've just had now to be confronted with, okay, you can't, they've tried the electoral system, governments aren't doing anything. Try the justice system, that's not work, that's not doing anything. They're being cracked down on by the police in all sort of aspects of, striking or protests or anything like that. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, tell me where to go. Give people an alternative because there isn't one. People are
Podcasting is the most effective activism you can do.
It's so true, actually. I endorse that message. But it just baffles me. And I get why people say stuff like that because it's, it's an easy answer to just say, I support the idea, but the way you're doing it is wrong. But we're getting to a point now where that's just not enough anymore. You've got to be out there. You've got to be, fighting for justice and for your rights because, like you said, with the Supreme Court striking down basically the Environmental Protection Agency, defanging it, undoing Roe v. Wade, the potential things that are happening across the West at the moment, of curtailing freedoms and people's rights to protest and stand against the state. It's a scary path we're taking, and people need to know that when push comes to shove, the way you're going to undo all those, negative changes is by being out there, protesting, marching, making it inconvenient for the state. And there's, at the end of the day, that's sort of one of the very few options we have left to be able to make our voices be heard and actually affect change in this country. The way it's worked before, and it'll keep working for us.
What he did was historically ignorant, it was offensive, and it was idiotic. But it didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't Adam Band who approved the national curriculum which teaches primary school students that Australia Day and Anzac Day are contested. It was a coalition education minister that approved that curriculum. It's not Adam Band only who's supporting this racist and superfluous so-called voice to parliament. It's every ASX company in the country. It's not Adam Band who made Qantas announce a welcome to country when you land at domestic airports like what happens now. It was Alan Joyce. Adam Band doesn't run Qantas. The point is that the flag is contested because we have allowed for it to be contested, because we have created a culture in which it's okay to, it's an acceptable notion to say I'm ashamed of the flag, and a culture in which Adam Band, he leads a party now with 16 members of parliament.
The call to action this week, support Blockade Australia. Please go to blockadeaustralia.com. Even if you just want to find out more, they do have a link to a legal fund, which they are going to need. I think it's fair to say. I'm sure there are a bunch of cool lawyers who are doing some pro bono work, but all this stuff costs money. If you can spare it and you want to support them and stand in solidarity with Blockade Australia, do that. or I'm sure Blockade Australia will be organising in other parts of the country in the coming months and years to come. You can follow them on social media at Blockade Oz. Also, Counteract Oz. There's a great organisation that helps and trains grassroots activists and supplies legal support. Counteract Oz. Check them out too if you can. Thank you, Stephen Bates. This has been an absolute joy. Is there anything that people should know that you want to plug? Like, how can activated Greens members, Greens volunteers, Greens allies help you as an MP moving forward? What is coming up? What should people be looking for?
Well, we should have all of our office and everything set up within the next couple of weeks is what I'm hoping for. Mm-hmm. And what I really, really want is, especially, if you live in Brisbane, I want the office to be this hub of community activity and community engagement. So what I want to really do is, work with different community orgs, work with, protesters and things like that to sort of, just help organize people. Because I think, I can do as much work as I can in the political side of things, in the legislative side of things, but we need those voices out there in the community and, shouting and yelling to force other people in Parliament to actually create change. So that's sort of my vision is where I'm at the moment. But, if you're in the Greens, get in contact with, people like me, your MPs, your senators, because a lot of the time we actually already have connections to people in these organizations because, we've spoken at a protest or something like that. And we can keep you up to date with, what's happening. Like we had a big march last night in the city. They had over 1,000 people show up, which is amazing for Brisbane. Brisbane's definitely becoming, we used to be this little sleepy town that I think people associated us with. But I don't know, since having 3 Greens MPs in the, across the city, people are activated. People are motivated. They want to get involved now. And I think that's really, really exciting. So my job now is to make sure we don't lose that momentum, is to be able to connect people to groups that they're passionate about and to connect people together so that, we can build this solidarity, build this collective movement that's going to affect change.
What was the protest for last night?
Protest for last night was for abortion rights because it was only decriminalized in Queensland in 2018. And even then it's still really difficult to obtain an abortion and obtain reproductive health care in the state. So, yeah, it was amazing. So many people showed up. And we had a rally last weekend to refresh people on the religious discrimination bill, which is still a priority of the new government. Mm-hmm. I've had 300-400 people show up to that. It's just really exciting because, I don't know, for people that have lived in Brisbane, you're used to going along to these protests and seeing 30 or 40 people.
Right.
And that's it. But now people feel, I don't know, there's this renewed sense of hope that their voices can be influential now. And it's just so exciting to see so many people get activated and get involved. It's just, it's so good.
That's so good, man. Well, congrats on graduating from Parliament School and good luck in there. Thank you for being co-host on Serious Danger, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's fun. I'll come back. If you'll have me.
Oh, anytime, man. Anytime. If you like the show, rate and review it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now. Share it around. We really appreciate that. Follow us on social media at Serious Danger AU. Subscribe to us on YouTube, please. If you're watching this on YouTube, we'd really appreciate that. Send us an email anytime, hello@seriousdangerpod.com. Solidarity, comrades. See you soon.
Serious Danger Australia.